The train was already a ghost when she realized she'd been left behind. Its iron wheels moaned like a dying thing as it wound itself down the rails, a serpent of smoke uncoiling against the bleeding sky. Clara Whitmore stood ankle-deep in dust, her gloved hands gripping a carpet bag that felt suddenly heavier than her entire life. She had thought she was cargo once, precious enough to be carried westward toward a promise yet. Here she was, cast off like a splinter from a splitting log. The rails still quivered with memory under her boots. She looked both ways, but there was nothing, only horizon upon horizon, the kind that seemed to smirk at human hope. The air was dry as old paper. It scratched her throat, clung to her lips. Wind teased the fraying ribbon of her bonnet, lifting it just enough for her to feel the sting of humiliation creeping up her neck. She had imagined stepping from that train into a new chapter, head high, maybe even smiling through the ache of all she'd lost. Instead, the chapter had ended before the page could turn. Clara swallowed against the bitter heat and blinked until her vision steadied. The last car slid from sight, leaving silence so wide it pressed against her chest like an unspoken sentence. Somewhere far off, a hawk turned slow circles against the burning dusk, patient as judgment. She would not cry, not here where the earth could drink it and laugh. She pressed her lips into a line and forced her mind to practical things. How far to the next town? 10 miles, perhaps 20. She had heard whispers on the train of a station down the line, though whispers had proven a cruel currency before. The truth was simple. If merciless, she had nowhere to go, and it had been her fault, though, so they told her. She'd been foolish enough to believe in a man whose hands were soft from ink, not soil, a man who wrote her letters full of poetry and promises until the ink soured into scorn. The others on the train had learned of it. Whispers ripple fast in a car lined with velvet seats and small eyes. She'd watched those whispers curdle into smirks, felt the heat of stares burning like the desert sun. Then came the conductor's voice, brittle as bone. "Tickets, no good without a name to meet you, miss." The man who was meant to stand at some distant platform had vanished like smoke, and now so had her passage. She shifted her carpetbag from one sore hand to the other and began walking. The track stretched before her like a scar, straight as judgment, no mercy in it. The iron rails gleamed dull red in the sinking light, and the wooden ties beneath her boots gave off the ghost of tar and heat. Her skirts dragged against the grit, collecting dust as if to mark her fallen state. Step after step, her breath hitched. The horizon didn't draw closer. It seemed to lean away from her, grinning. Every sound sharpened the rasp of her shoes, the hollow cry of wind in the telegraph. Wires overhead. Then, from somewhere behind, a hiss. Low, sinister. Clara froze. The sound came again, curling through the silence like smoke. She turned her head slowly, heartbeat climbing into her throat, and there it was, a rattlesnake, thick and coiled knot. 5 feet away, its scaled body glistening bronze in the slanting sun, its head lifted, tongue flicking like a black flame. The rattle sang again a dry, merciless song. She dared not move. Her breath lodged tight, lungs aching. The bag slid from her fingers without sound, settling in the dust. Time stretched until the air itself seemed to crack. She could smell her own fear, sharp as copper. Then a thunderclap split the world. The snake's head burst like a rotten fruit. Its body writhed once, then lay still, dust rising around it in a lazy, cruel halo. Clara flinched so hard her knees buckled. She clutched at nothing, eyes darting toward the echo. And that was when she saw him. He sat his horse like a shadow carved from the setting sun, tall in the saddle, hat brim low, a rifle still smoking in his hands. The horse a dark bay, with a hide that caught the dying light shifted under him, muscles rolling like water under stone. For a long, breathless moment, he did not move. Neither did she. The wind hurried between them, kicking up skirts, tugging, at the edges of silence. When he spoke, his voice was calm enough to make her shiver. "You lost, ma'am." Clara tried to find her breath. It came in fragments, barely fit for words. "Seems so." Her voice cracked, shame leaking through the seams. He nudged the horse closer, rifle resting easy across his thighs now. Up close. The lines of his face came clear strong, hewn from weather and time. Eyes the color of storm clouds under a brow made for shadows. A day's worth of stubble clung to his jaw, catching glints of fire from the sinking sun. "You walking far?" he asked. "Far enough," she said, though the words tasted like a lie. She couldn't meet his gaze for long. Something in it felt too steady, too knowing. His glance fell to her shoes, scuffed thin edges, lifting. Her skirts were dust-stained, halfway to the knee. He said nothing, only swung down from the saddle with a grace that seemed unfair for a man so solid. He unhooked a canteen from the saddle horn and held it out. "Best drink while there's light." He murmured. Clara hesitated. Pride reared up, bitter and hollow, but thirst was louder. She reached, fingers brushing his for the smallest fraction of a breath. The water burned sweet, spilling cool relief down her throat, and for an instant she feared she might weep from that alone. She forced the canteen closed and handed it back with a nod that cost her everything. "Thank you." He studied her. Moment longer, then tipped his chin toward the horizon. "Nearest town's 20 miles east. My place is 10, that way." His hand flicked toward a low line of hills, purpled now in twilight. Clara's pulse thudded in her ears. To climb behind a stranger, ride into a silence thick with unspoken things, what choice did she have? Her limbs ached, her stomach clawed itself with hunger. Still, the memory of men's promises, how they soured, how they cut-pressed like a thorn in her mind. As if reading that doubt, he added quietly, "You'll not come to harm under my roof." No flourish, no coaxing, just iron in the words, and something else, a weariness she understood too well. The wind tugged at her skirt. A coyote cried far off, high and lonesome. Clara drew a breath that felt like surrender and gathered her bag. When his hand reached down, she placed hers in it. His palm was calloused, warm, startlingly gentle as he lifted her up behind him. The saddle smelled of leather and dust, of sunburnt days and solitude. Her arms hovered, uncertain, until the horse shifted under them and instinct dragged her forward, hands catching at his coat. The fabric was rough, the man beneath it steady as stone. She closed her eyes as the horse started on, and the rails behind them gleamed faintly in the dying light, like the bones of something that had once mattered. The horizon opened before them, endless and waiting. She did not know what lay ahead only that night was coming fast, and in its shadows rode to strangers bound by nothing but need, the dust curling behind them like the ghost of old shame. The sky broke open before they reached the ridge. Dusk had been a copper veil when they started, but now it tore apart in jagged streaks of grey and fire. Clouds stampeded low, swollen and bruised, their bellies flashing with restless light. The air thickened, clinging damp as breath against the skin. Clara felt it gather in her lungs, heavy with the scent of rain and something feral a warning. The ranch appeared like a shadow coaxed from the storm, sprawling against the vastness. A long porch, weather-beaten and bone-pale, fronted a house that looked too big for a single man to live in. The windows stared black and empty. Beyond, a barn crouched low under the weight of gathering dark. Fence lines stretched like brittle ribs into the hills, their wire humming faint with the charge in the air. When Elias drew the horse to a halt, Clara slid down stiffly, boots sinking into soil that was already loosening under the storm's breath. Her legs trembled from hours in the saddle, but pride clamped her jaw shut against complaint. He said nothing, only swung down with that same easy grace and led the horse under the lean-to beside the barn. She followed, clutching her carpet-bag like a tether to herself. "House is open," he said without looking at her. Rain-streaked. His hat brim dripped from the raw line of his jaw. His voice carried quiet iron, as if the world itself bent to listen when he spoke. Fires laid in the hearth. "I'll be along after I stable him." Clara hesitated on the threshold of the porch, boots scuffing against boards that whispered under her weight. The door yielded to her touch, sighing inward on a breath of cool, stale air. The room beyond yawned wide and dim, shaped by long years of silence. A stone hearth crouched against the far wall, where a pyramid of wood waited like a promise. Shadows pooled in the corners, thick as secrets. She moved slow, her skirts whispering, fingers brushing furniture dulled by dust. There was a table, scarred and square, two chairs that looked more like sentries than companions. On the mantel, a single photograph leaned against the stoner woman, sharp-boned and solemn, her hair bound tight as duty. Clara stared until her throat closed, then looked away. Kneeling, she coaxed a flame from the waiting tinder. It flared with a brittle eagerness, throwing the room into shivering amber. The light reached her hands first, then climbed her face, painting her in hues. Of warmth she did not feel. Behind her, the wind moaned through the eaves like something mourning. The door opened. Elias stepped in, hat dripping, shoulders dark with rain. He closed the door without hurry and stood a moment, gaze roving the fire, then her. Steam curled from his coat as he shrugged it off and hung it by the door. For an instant, the lamplight skimmed the planes of his face, catching at the wear carved deep around his mouth and eyes. He looked like a man built of distance's long roads, long silences, all the things a body carries when words won't bear their weight. "You'll want something hot," he said finally, crossing to a cupboard. A pot clanged soft as he set it on the stove. "Ain't much but beans and salt pork. It'll fill." Clara murmured thanks, though the word felt small in her mouth. She perched on the edge of a chair, hands folded tight in her lap. The fire popped, spitting tiny sparks that died before they touched the hearthstone. They ate without talk, save for the dull scrape of spoons against tin. The food was plain, heavy, but it steadied her belly, sent fragile warmth seeping into her bones. When her bowl was clean, she set it down gentle, as if sound might shatter the brittle truce between them. Elias leaned back, one arm draped over the chair, eyes hooded. "You'll want rest." His tone carried no question, yet something it brushed against her skin like a test. She opened her mouth what to say, that she'd not sleep easy under a stranger's roof, that she feared what folk would whisper if they knew. But the words withered under his gaze. There was no hunger in it, no gloating, only a worn steadiness, like stone weathered by too many. "Winters, I'll take the settee," she said at last. chin lifting as if that might stake a claim on her own decency. He inclined his head, slow, unreadable. "Suit yourself." Then he rose, gathered the bowls, and set them in the sink without another word. Night fell heavy. Rain lashed the windows, wind clawed the eaves. The fire hunched low, its glow pulsing against the dark. Clara lay curled on. The narrow settee skirts loosened, boots tucked beneath. Sleep skittered close and fled, leaving her with the ache of memory, the hiss of whispers on velvet seats, the cold press of judgment like a blade at her spine. She shut her eyes hard, but it was no shield against the storm outside or the one in her chest. Sound split the dark, sharp, urgent. Clara jerked upright. Another sound followed, a frantic thud, wood on wood, then a chorus of high, savage yelps tearing through the wind. Coyotes. She was on her feet before thought caught up, skirts tangling as she stumbled toward the door. Elias was already there, rifle in hand, jaw clenched against the flicker of lightning. "They've got the chickens cornered," he said, voice taut as wire. He wrenched the door open, and the storm lunged in. Wet and wild. Clara seized the lantern from its hook and followed, the cold biting her through cloth, rain needling her skin. The yard boiled with shadows, wind screaming like a banshee. Through the sheets of rain, she glimpsed the pen feathers flying, wire rattling under the fury of snapping jaws. Elias fired once, twice, the rifle's crack rolling like thunder. 2 coyotes spun and dropped, but the rest scattered and circled, eyes burning hellish in the dark. He reloaded with hands quick and sure, boots slogging mud. A shape loomed sudden, a horse. Wild-eyed and slamming against the fence, terror turned. Loose in its blood, Clara's breath locked. The beast lunged, breaking free in a spray of splinters, hooves pounding toward her like the hammer of God. She froze. The lantern swung from her fist, casting a mad reel of light. Then Elias was there, roaring her name, a sound ripped raw from his chest as he struck the horse's path. His arm hooked her waist, yanking her clear. They crashed into the muck, breath punched from her lungs, the world spinning in shards of rain and terror. For a heartbeat they lay tangled, mud and storm pressing them into one trembling shape. His breath seared her ear, harsh and hot. Her hands clutched at his coat without meaning to, fingers fisting in the rough wool. The storm raged on, but in that hollow carved by fear, there was only the drum of his heart and the shudder of her own. Then he was rising, hauling her with him, voice flint-edged. Inside now, they stumbled through the gale, half blind, his arm a band of iron at her back. The door slammed against the wind, and silence fell heavy, broken only by their ragged breaths. Rain streamed from their hair, their clothes pooling, dark on the floorboards. Clara stood shaking, skirts clinging, boots bleeding mud. Elias stripped off his coat and flung it aside, then crossed to the hearth in 3 strides. Fire leaped under his hand, greedily sucking at the logs he threw on. Light bloomed, fierce and gold, painting the hollows of his face. He turned, eyes locking on hers, storm-grey, storm-wild. "You hurt," she shook her head, breath hitching. "No." The word fractured on her tongue. Something eased in him then. Some invisible knot loosening. His shoulders sagged, just enough to show the weight he bore. Without a word, he reached for a shawl draped over a chair-a-faded thing, soft from years, and set it across her shoulders with a gentleness that undid her more than the rescue. His fingers brushed her sleeve, lingered half a beat, then fell. Away. Clara gripped the shawl, feeling the ghost of that touch burned through the wall. No one had steadied her in so long. No one had risked more than words. Elias stepped back, gaze slipping toward the fire. "Storm'll break by morning," he said, voice low. "You can stay till then." She could not answer, not with words, only with the slow lift of her eyes, meeting his across the hush, the crackle of flames speaking what neither dared. Outside, the wind sobbed itself hoarse. Inside, the silence swelled, rich as soil after rain. Sometimes, she thought, home is not four walls nor a promise sealed in ink. Sometimes it's a hand that hauls you from the dark, a shore laid gentle on your shoulders, and a quiet that feels like mercy. The fire snapped, sending sparks to die in the air, and Clara, wrapped in borrowed warmth, wondered if she had been cast or forecarried, at last, to where her soul could breathe.